countdown, Jamie.
Hey, thanks to everybody out there who is joining us live for this deep dive on the evolving joy of craft beer and hops. Looking at the chat so far, I see we've got folks from Michigan, from Brazil, from Peru. So certainly joining from all over the place. If Seattle, Washington there. We have those comments. So whatever platform you're tuned in on, whether it's our StreamYard platform, Finger Lakes, Netherlands, Asheville, Uruguay, folks listening and watching from all over. Whatever channel you are joining us from, we can see those comments that you make. And so throw some questions out there for everybody here as we go. The one benefit of this kind of deep dive webinar format is that we can answer your questions directly, and we are all here for it. Over the course of this, we're going to talk about the state of hops today, both from a business and a creative standpoint. And, I guess what we want to kind of kick this off with is the idea that craft beer has never tasted better. The bar has never been higher. Hops are still a major draw for craft consumers. We are going to dive into how these three successful breweries of different sizes, structures, and market, how they keep pace in this current market, how they take a fresh perspective on hops, and how they can use those to inspire new and continued growth. And we are not just talking about in the IPA category. We're going to cover it in a whole bunch of different ways. We'll start off with some quick introductions, and maybe we'll start with you, Patrick. Why don't you give us a little background, the quick background on you and on Sunriver?
Alrighty, yeah, Patrick Raasch. I started kind of brewing career around 2010 in the Midwest. We're called Free State Brewing Company, kind of an it's first craft beer in Kansas since Prohibition. So kind of got my boots wet there, and then during there went to Siebel, and then I've been out at Sunriver Brewing Company since 2016. So I'm coming on 10 years here this summer. I couldn't be happier. Fantastic spot, and was looking to make it to this beautiful Pacific Northwest.
Congratulations on your win at Alpha King last year. That was quite a feat. And of course, if anyone reads Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, you've just seen the score after score of high-scoring Sunriver beers that have come our way, and just some phenomenal work that you all are doing out there. Sam, why don't you give us a quick background and the other half story?
Sure. Everybody, I'm Sam Richardson. I'm the co-founder and brewmaster at Other Half Brewing. Our main headquarters is in New York. I started my career in the Pacific Northwest. I'm from Oregon. So I went to Oregon State, did brewing science there, and worked for Pyramid out there before I moved to the West Coast. That was 2003. We started Other Half in 2014, so 12 years old. We have brewing locations in New York, DC, and Finger Lakes region of New York. That's what I got.
Nice. And Brendan, you're here in Fort Collins with me, not too far away from me. Tell us your story and the Odell story real quick.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Queens, New York, not far from where Sam's headquarters are there in Brooklyn. Came out here to CSU at Fort Collins in the late 80s, and the Odell brewery just started in 89. So I graduated school in early 90s with the intention of going back east and opening a brewery, but figured I ought to start getting my boots wet, as Patrick said, at another brewery before just launching on my own. So my wife and I started at Odell. She started at New Belgium in 95, and I've been here ever since with an opportunity to get some ownership along the way. And now I've been running operations for a few decades here. So
Incredible. And then Jim, why don't you tell us about you and about Indie Hops?
Yeah, sure. No, I co-founded Indie Hops back in 2009. And at that time, it was kind of a rough time for craft brewing in the United States, pretty much everywhere. But Oregon had been an early adopter to the idea. The market had been very, very welcoming, and a lot of breweries were doing quite well. And so it was something that we felt would spread. And at the same time, that was when Anheuser-Busch was under hostile takeover. We, looking at the Oregon hop industry, and seeing that so much of what was growing in Oregon was the Willamette variety going to that company, and we could just kind of sense there was a bit of a change coming. So we thought this would be a good time to start a hop business based in Oregon. And so we built the first hop pellet mill in Oregon, and started a program with Oregon State University to develop new hop varieties. And then just, that takes a long time. So we started putting the parts together to be a hop supplier, and get in position when interest in new hop material would start coming through, to have a process for evaluating those hops. And, the concept that the industry would expand and grow meant to us that there would be need for more hop varieties, et cetera. And so that's what we're still doing. Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's kick off with a kind of a broad question to set some foundation for the future, the big topic which we want to talk about, which is innovation. And I think we have to ground that in this idea of what the beer market is now. When you started the company, Sam, Brendan, Patrick, when you guys got started in brewing, it was a very different environment than it is now. We've watched things, just take off exponentially. If you look at just volume numbers over the last 15 years, craft beer is 4x what it was 15 years ago. And even though things seem to be, dropping down and settling into some new normal that isn't what it was at the, height of 2015, 2016, and just, that kind of skyrocketing growth, it doesn't mean that there's no market here. It just means that the challenge for you all, both as creative brewers and as business operators and business-minded brewers, it means the questions you have to answer are a little bit different. From a broad sense, and Patrick, maybe we'll start with you. From a broad sense, what are the last several years, how's that evolution, especially in the world of hoppy beers, kind of presented itself for you all, and what have been some of the biggest changes that you all have had to undergo in the way that you approach hop-forward beers?
Yeah, I think it's just like everything, an evolving market, and I think a blessing for us with having 5 locations and great relations with our pubs. We can be direct to consumer and get that feedback as soon as possible, and from there it's evolving even core beers. It's our pale ale, maybe at one point I had a whole bag of crystal malt, God forbid these days, to a half a bag, and now we pulled it out and just seeing, we don't want to alienate our long-term loyal customers, but also kind of seeing powder palates drifting and changing, and so we'll start manipulating recipes a little bit, definitely with the hop load for sure. It's looking at maybe those BUs drop a little bit, maybe ABV comes down a little bit, and then how we can integrate a lot of these new hop products as well to kind of add some maybe new pizzazz or flair to some of these products. I think it's a challenge, with the core products, making sure we don't, manipulate, change them, bastardize them too much. And if we start getting there, then, we just make a new product. We don't want to alienate some of our customers that love that, classic kind of when we first started making it, 10 plus years ago. So it's always, it's interesting, and it has evolved throughout the last couple of years, for sure. I think that people are looking at a lot more of these newer products, and maybe some of these classic C hops and just the straight grapefruit pine resin is not as intriguing as maybe something that tastes like pink lemonade, and how we can integrate that and evolve. But also not changing who we are and what some of these core products are as well. So.
Sure. Sam, for you all in the other half, the earliest phase of the brewery was driven by excitement, consumer excitement about a style that was growing like wildfire, that was in flux, and it was so predicated on experiencing new flavors that we couldn't experience before in beer. And now 10 years, 12 years after that kind of phase of exuberance, you all have matured into a business with many, with a number of different locations, and also, matured stylistically in that sense, and are feeding more different types of consumers and a larger volume of beer. How, explain to me in a kind of broad sense, like, how that transition has gone over the last number of years.
Yeah, we'd have to keep that broad because I feel like there's actually so much analysis of the market on the East Coast just to consider in that. I think probably the biggest factor in what we do has just been the maturing market here. I think when we started, the East Coast was far behind the West Coast in terms of acceptance of craft beer. And I think the acceptance of it was really driven by New England IPA. So a lot of people learned about beer for the first time through that, whereas more on the West Coast, people came up with West Coast IPA. I mean, I made West Coast IPA for 12 years before we started making New England IPA professionally. So I think what we're seeing now is that because the market's maturing and people have been more involved in craft beer longer, there's a couple of things. One, some of it is fatigue. I think that there was so much excitement. People were going so hard on craft beer, spending so much time. I think some of our older drinkers have kind of gotten fatigue in general. And I think for us, it's just finding newer beer drinkers on the East Coast. I think the opportunity there for us has just been to bring back styles that maybe we wouldn't have made before. Part of that's also just our general growth, getting to the point where we can still continue to make the amount of IPA we need to, but still bring new styles in. But IPA is still king, whether it's West Coast or, New England style, it's still going to be number one. So yeah, we're just always looking for new ways to bring new hop varieties in to keep people interested, because I do think it's one of the most interesting dynamic aspects of craft beer. So
sure. Brendan, for you all in Odell, you have a beer that's pretty much a standard in the state of Colorado, Odell IPA. And so your challenge is to keep it what it is in the minds of consumers and not let it age out or fall off, while at the same time, continuing to drive some experimentation, creating some new brands, feeding tap rooms. Talk about, what your strategy today looks like in regard to the hoppy beers in your portfolio.
Sure. Yeah, we'll take Odell IPA first. I guess, it's about 20 years old now. And at the time, we built it to be very different from the existing IPAs in the market, insofar as it was focused on flavor and aroma and not so much bitterness. I mean, that was kind of the era of the IBU wars, and we're moving in the other direction. And there were some new hop varieties coming out that were really exciting, that kind of lent that more fruity, less resinous, less, hard charging kind of bitterness. So we designed it with that in mind, and also designed it to be able to grow and evolve over time. So it was 8 or 9 different varieties that were always kind of moving around and fine tuning. I'll just give you a couple specific examples. And when we first built it, it had Horizon and Perle grown in Oregon, in addition to Amarillo and Simcoe and Chinook and all the other hops that were in there. But those hops aren't even available really anymore. And in fact, back, what was that, Jim, 07 or somewhere around there, shortly after you started.
Yeah, 2010, I think. Yeah.
2010, we were talking about Perle, and we contracted some. Jim got some in the ground. We tried to kind of keep that going, keep it alive. But it's, it's a struggle when there's no demand beyond one brewery for a certain hop. So we had to adapt, and Strata ultimately found its way into Odell IPA as a layer, kind of representing that Oregon terroir, even though it's very different from those other hops. So yeah, we've always tried to maintain the integrity of focus on flavor and aroma. It's always been clear. It's a balanced beer. There is some malt, but like Patrick said, there's not as much crystal as there was day one. So yeah, that's been really a fun challenge, and our 3 different R&D systems allow us to play around, even side stream some work, try some different dry hop combinations to make sure we're always meeting the customer expectation for that beer being aromatic, fruity, balanced, and drinkable.
So I have a quick question for Brendan, just to throw in there. I mean, so as you were evolving that beer, did you ever get any pushback from like the regular customers that were sure about what it was supposed to be?
No, I think, again, what Patrick was mentioning earlier is exactly what we did. Everything was tried over the bar first with, the most diehard customers. And we're our biggest critics. I mean, I'm going to go nuts before anything changes on Odell. That was my pilot beer back then, so until I'm gone, I don't think we'll make any dramatic moves, but we're always fine tuning when every crop year comes through. We're running those hops through our sensory panel, making sure even before we put them in the beer that they're on the right track, and then we'll adjust the blends based on different crop years and the characteristics of the different lots we select. So no, we've never really had someone go, "Hey, you changed this beer." They have with other beers. It's funny, 90 Shillings, another one of our kind of core brands, and people do. When we stopped bottling 90 Shilling, everyone thought the beer changed. It's like, it's the same exact beer, man. It's sorry, but that's the only blowback we've gotten, not for IPA.
Sure. So, then that's an interesting one. That pace of change ends up being pretty slow and pretty measured, as you make some of those changes over. And I think that it's a point that I love making over and over again. There are some big name brand IPAs out there, and if you taste them now versus what that beer was 15 or 20 years ago, they're dramatically different beers, and yet they still hit the same. And I think that's a magic piece to the way that the brewers make those changes in small iterative ways that any individual change is not going to necessarily be noticeable to somebody drinking, but then the aggregate change over the course of 4 or 5 years would be noticeable if you could have benchmarked it. Of course, there's no one who's going to save a 5-year-old IPA and be able to do a 1-to-1 taste. And so you all are safe from that perspective. But for you, Brendan, what is that kind of like when you are considering those changes? What is that process like?
Well, we have an R&D team, and like I said, we have 3 different R&D brew houses. So we'll start there and we'll do maybe 100 rips before we make a decision. We're pretty slow and deliberate about it because it's such an important brand for us. Whereas maybe a secondary or a new brand, we're going a little more wild. We're trying some things out. We're going heavy at first and then backing off, but not with our lead horse. It's very slow and measured, and it's run through the pilot systems and run through sensory.
Sam, you all are very focused on innovation, and that innovation often involves things like new hop varieties in different formats, different combinations of hops, different saturation levels of hops, double dry hops, triple dry hopped. These kinds of things drive a lot of interest for a certain leading edge of consumer in some of these markets. How do you all approach R&D, knowing that this requires, you're now approaching it on 2 sides. You have some core brands like Broccoli that have become very well known and have the market knows them, and they have some decent kind of distribution out there. But then some of these that you are getting people to come to the brewery to taste and to buy, that is a constant process of R&D and creative evolution. Talk to me about how you get how that process works at Other Half.
First, I want to say that we have a customer that keeps beers for forever and bring to get IPAs that are 5 years old. So no, it's not true that nobody does that. Yeah. So, our whole brand's been built on constant change. So we actually just make things. It's pretty rare. Some things have gone through trial. The beers we make, we just go for it. Their flagships, we do some trialing, but it's pretty minimal. I think we're just checking to make sure that we're not going to be unhappy, and then we just pull the trigger. I think if we think what we're going to do is going to improve it, that's our goal. Partly because we're not really, I think we're less interested in the sanctity of a particular beer than just making it better if we see the opportunity. And we're also, I think about 50% of what we make is flagships across 6 different flagships. So we're not deeply invested in one brand so much that I think it is easier for us to make those changes. Not as many people see it or notice it because they're drinking kind of a big range of beers from us.
Just going for it requires, it sounds like that's easy, but it actually requires a lot of preparation to be able to just go for it. And I have watched some of that preparation. Saw you in Yakima last year. You spend a lot of time making sure that those ingredients that the brewers then have to go for it with are going to be the right things for them. Talk about that upfront kind of preparation that it takes to then have the right tools to brew these beers at the right time for the folks.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to gloss over that. Like, obviously, we put a lot of time into hop selection. We usually make several trips out to Yakima a year. I go to New Zealand every year for our New Zealand hop selection. So I do feel like we're starting from a base point where I know that the hops we're looking at to use are going to make a good beer. And a lot of that, being able to understand doing sensory on a hop and then actually applying it to a beer is a learned process. It takes a lot of time and effort to get to the point where you trust what you're smelling on the table. Also knowing that it's still going to be processed into pellets, and what's the end result of that. It's a learning process. So I do feel like we put a lot of work into that, and we've gotten to the point where I trust our process. And if we're going to put something in a beer, it's going to be a good beer. If that answers the...
Sure. Patrick, let's talk about you. You are just over the mountains from the Willamette Valley. So your access, you're a couple hours away at most from the main Oregon hops growing region. Talk about your process of R&D brewing and hop ingredient evaluation and procuring the best kind of hops for the beers you're going to make, and then how that drives some of the development process behind new beers.
Yeah, I mean, with our regional, location being so, close to, like you said, to those farms and fields, that's starting with kind of day one. Once they're starting to kind of develop and get towards kind of the mid-late stages, we love walking hop farms and fields and just rubbing them and kind of getting an understanding of, we had this specific farm last year, what's it doing, and we're not dead set on an exact farm wise, but it's always like that terroir that's very important. And what we're trying to accomplish with maybe, say strata, we want maybe one that's more just straight passion fruit for this specific beer. But then, we want that super punchy, resinous, wafting cannabis, strawberry characteristics for this other beer. So it's definitely, as they kind of talked about, it's through sensory and hop selection and evaluation, and trying to, I guess, work backwards from what we're trying to accomplish, and then starting to kind of gather those different ingredients. And luckily for us being, so close by, and we have a location in Eugene, so we can pop up and swing by some of these different warehouses and farms and pull in a handful of different lots and see which ones that might work for this and might work for that. But yeah, it's definitely an educated guess, but definitely some R&D along the way. But understanding what we're, I guess, trying to accomplish with it. Yeah, it's just fantastic being this close. So we love fresh hop season. So
Sure. I would love to hear everyone's opinion on this, and maybe we'll start with you, Brendan. Like, there are a couple of different modes of creativity as I think about it when it comes to designing new beers. There are those brewers that envision a flavor and then build recipes and collect the right ingredients and hops to execute on that flavor idea. And then there's the other mode where rubbing or sniffing or drinking, a beer from a friend or a competitor with a certain hop in it can spark some ideas, or even like create a jumping off point where it starts, running you, throwing you down. Oh, I could do this. Oh, what if I also did this? What is that creative mode like, for you? Is it typically driven by ingredients or driven by flavor ideas? And then how do you go down those pathways to ultimately hone it into a beer?
Yeah, I think we move in both directions. Staying on the hop selection, walking the fields, kind of thing. We've been very involved for a long time on experimental varieties from all of our suppliers. I mean, I'll take Crush. I know this is our Jim, not one of yours, I know, but
It's okay.
Crush as an example. We're walking, fields with Jason Peralt one time. There's just a couple of hills and smelled this 586 and this HPC 586 hop. And that was a moment I was like, we got to figure out a way to get this into a beer. This thing's pretty awesome. How can we design something around it? How can we help get this hop off the ground? So we went and sponsored 10 acres of it to try to give it a lift and now it's got a name. So there's an example where the hop kind of drove us. Strata in a lot of ways, the same thing. That was a shocking Oregon hop. We brewed with, 10 pounds of some of the first stuff Jim had on our pilot system, whole leaf. So we used our hop back, and it was like, I've never picked up an Oregon hop that gave me this much like juicy ruby red grapefruit and cannabis funk skunk. It's like, that's pretty special particularly for an Oregon hop. So, we're like, let's keep talking about how to get this thing, help get it off the ground. So we went ahead and contracted with Jim to get some more strata going and we developed a new beer, Mountain Standard IPA at the time, that was really based on strata. So those are kind of two examples of the raw material driving. And then there's plenty of other cases where we're looking for, the hazy IPA that's really fruity. Okay, how can we go build that, meet the consumer need? So I think we move in both directions, but the raw material driving the end product is more exciting for me.
Sure. How about you, Sam? That mode is driven by rubbing hops or sampling hops and seeing, experiencing some of those new flavors, thinking about what those could be in beer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very ingredient driven for the vast majority of beers. For example, use strata as an example. Doing selection at Indy for strata. It's one of the few varieties where we've actually split our selection between two different lots based on how different they were and how we thought they would play in beers. Basically, similar to Patrick's earlier description of them, is like more strawberry cannabis-led ones versus tropical ones. So that's like an opportunity for us to basically make two different beers with the same hop. And I think we look at hops like that in general. We're always looking for just the best of the variety that we can find. Then we try to make beers with the best hops. I mean, it's as simple as that. Rarely ever go into it with an idea for a beer. It's find the ingredient, move forward with that.
That's an interesting point about the kind of breadth within a hop like strata. Jim, talk about that a little bit. There are some hop varieties that do not necessarily have that kind of breadth, where most of the lots are going to be pretty similar, or the level of difference is just narrower. And then there are some hops in strata, is one of them, where based on the conditions that year, based on the terroir where it's grown, based on pick timing, based on a whole bunch of other factors, they can dramatically change the kind of expression within the hop. Give us some examples, of the kind of breadth of descriptors that you hear there, and then maybe a counterpoint to some hops that maybe don't have that are much more singular in their expression.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's like you said, Strata it is one of those that has that breadth, and that's actually where the name came from. Just all the layers of character we were getting out of that hop that led to the name Strata. And I think some of the descriptors are brought up already, and many of them are in that fruit world of passion fruit. We have gotten a lot of orange coming up from certain brewers as well. And you'll run into peach every now and then. But ruby red grapefruit is another one that will pop up quite often. When you get into the cannabis side of it, the rock concert cannabis is another way we speak about it. And then the strawberry component, as a number of folks mentioned there. It just all lays out. And I feel like every lot of Strata has these in the hop, but different lots will lean different directions. If you do want to, as Patrick pointed out, if you want to go a little bit more into that cannabis world, we can generally identify the lots that are doing that. What is it about the terroir that does that? It's a little hard to say, because we've seen the same field produce slightly different versions of the hop in different years. So maybe it was something about, the care, how the farm treated the hop, or maybe it was the weather. It's the same soil and everything, but it's nice to have a hop like Strata in our portfolio where it can fill out an IPA all by itself, because very few hops can do that. I mean, if you get a hop that's more, a little more one-dimensional, I don't want to. There's not something bad about a hop being one-dimensional, so I don't want to throw any under the bus. But a hop, to me, like Sabro maybe, ends up just being a very hard-driving hop in a singular direction that is kind of hard to manage. It doesn't necessarily have that balance. When you hit it right, you can get some great things in your beer, but it makes it more challenging. And so, to us, it's nice selling a hop like Strata that can be many things depending on how it's brewed with and what lot it's chosen. Yeah.
Sure. I did not mean to put any kind of pejorative on the idea that kind of consistency or true to core kind of character is in some way a bad thing. It's just a different challenge, and brewers can approach these in different kinds of ways. Yeah, well, let's talk about this maybe we should touch on the whole sensory piece, because some of this kind of breadth of flavor is so, and an aroma is so important to brewers. Jim, give us a little bit of background on how you type out some of these, because being able to define what that breadth is its own challenge too, right? Brewers in a selection, like you might have a few lots next to each other, but our noses wear out quickly, and so being able to do it fresh and be able to have accurate kinds of sensory descriptions and some chemical data can be important for really understanding what a hop's doing. Talk about how that process goes to build some of that sensory information.
Yeah, I mean, what we'll do is each year, if we're going to look at maybe 160 new genotypes that come into the program, just as a single plant, we'll start going through the process on the dry rub. And what we're really looking just to weed it out and get it down from 160. As far as how many you can handle in a day, we'll typically go through 8 in the morning and then do another 8 in the afternoon. So we can get through it, fairly quickly like that on the dry rub. And we might weed it down to 75 hops. And then we'll start going through dry hopping those hops into a base beer. And that's when we're really kind of trying to find a hop that we think has market potential. Dry hopping is so prevalent now for craft brewing that it's just a great way to look at the hop and how it expresses itself in beer. So we'll go through that process. Again, we don't do a large, it's a small benchtop dry hop that works quite well. It takes a little more than an hour. So we can, again, go through 8 in the morning, 8 in the afternoon. And what we're looking for, I'll go on the simplification approach that Sam takes too. We're just looking for hops that taste amazing in beer. It's nothing fancy. You are also looking for hops that are unique. Don't want to bring sand to the beach, so to speak. If it's a flavor profile that is well supplied already. So you are looking for just, hops where you're tasting it in that beer and you're wishing you had a full pint there to consume. But yeah, we'll think specifically about how the hop might be used. Again, Strata was kind of a gift in a sense because of all the character that comes out. But then, you might take another, a fairly recent, the one we introduced after Strata was Lorraine. And we were excited to do that because we really wanted to after having this big IPA hop come out there in Strata, we were excited to, we were hoping we could put a really good lager hop out there, and we didn't think it'd happen right away, but it did. And, that's when, we've really noticed in looking at these different varieties, we kind of think of it as kind of the architecture of the hop. We've really noticed how clean the hop needs to be, how resin-free. I mean, it's completely the opposite of what you might be looking for in an IPA. I mean, it sounds obvious to say that, but to find a hop that behaves that way, is low enough alpha, but has enough alpha, doesn't dominate the beer, but complements it, finishes it in a way that makes you want to come back and drink more. There's an example of looking at a hop very specifically for a purpose in the marketplace. Yeah,
sure.
so,
And I love that dry hop testing because you're in a sideline way also testing oil saturation. Because you're going to see, if at an equivalent volume, just how expressive that hop is in that kind of environment. So even if it's not exactly testing the grams of oil in that, it's still getting to the same kind of effect that way.
Yeah, exactly. You'll get the different levels of expression from the different genotypes for sure.
Yeah. Brendan, you mentioned sponsoring an entire 10-acre field of an experimental hop, and you've also gotten involved in sponsoring American lager hops in early stages. It seems like that mode for you is get in very, very early and help these, hop farmers kind of establish and bring some of these things out there. As you're going through, then, I mean, that's an immense commitment if we think about it. 10 acres is going to be, a minimum of, 1,500 pounds. No, that's right. My math's going to be off. Jim's can correct me on the math here. Anyway, it's a significant amount of commitment to hops at a very early stage. As you start thinking about that, what is it that makes a hop stand out from others that says, hey, we're going to go commit at that kind of level to this at this early stage before it becomes something?
Yeah, I think Jim touched on it early. The hop needs to be different than other things that are out there. And it is about just what smells great and what may work out really well in a beer. And we won't go from, you can't do a 10-acre sponsorship anymore. I believe they instituted an Odell rule because we went a little crazy with it. And they don't do the spot. That was HBC. I don't think they do sponsorships anymore. It's more of just a sale thing. But we tried things out before we made the full commitment. But also we felt an obligation to the industry, honestly, to get some of the help, try to get some of these newer varieties up off the ground. We're pretty involved with Top Quality Group and HRC, and there's some new public varieties that folks are going to have to help get off the ground to really get enough material out there to give things a fair shot, because a small test plot doesn't represent a commercial yard. So anything we could do to get hops we felt were really special up to commercial level production, I think is something we're excited about and kind of necessary for the industry. And we had just enough experience to try to pinpoint. We've picked some winners along the way that we believed in, that we think, if there's something that we're pretty passionate about, we're going to try to help lift it.
Sure. Well, let's switch some gears and talk about hoppy beer styles and current market trends, and how you all are addressing, answering, and in some cases leading some of those things. If we look back again at the IBU wars of the 20-aughts, throwing 100 or 150 IBUs and making it bitter AF and gritty and just over the top was a mode for getting some attention from consumers. Like me, a lot of that generation of even 90s and 2000s, folks that entered craft beer, I'm not at an age where I drink like that anymore, but I still love hops, right? It's still, I primarily will drink hoppy beer styles. And so, so these styles are starting to evolve. Patrick, you still make things like heavily saturated double IPA that can go win Alpha King. But you're also, making sure that you've got a broad selection of hop forward beer styles at different levels of ABV to hit different kinds of drinkers and different kinds of, drinking kinds of occasions. Talk about how you think about that, both as a brewer and as a company planning these kinds of beers that are going to get out there in the distribution market.
Yeah, 100%. It's like we talked about earlier, continue leaning on, our loyal customer base at our pubs and seeing the evolving market. We still make, Vicious Mosquito, our core American IPA, still has Centennial in it, still has that big kind of, holding bitterness, that pine resin. And I think that does super well because it's now kind of, able to still provide that for that clientele that still enjoys that type of product. So I think that's kind of puts us at, a unique position with that beer where a lot of the market has changed, but we still hold on to that beer and hold that bitterness in that beer. Maybe not nearly quite what it was, 10 years ago for sure with the palate 100%, 100 IBUs beer, but beer like that, it still has some Crystal 15 in it. It's still dry, but not super dry as some of these West Coast IPAs. So we feel that bitterness helps balance it out, helps cut like that ethanol sweetness, cuts through some of that biscuit, caramel, honeycomb kind of characteristics. But we just released a new beer called Stomp. It's coming in at about 6.4%. A lot of these new hop products, the BUs are significantly lower than our OG flagship IPA, and the consumer base is loving it. It's a slightly different consumer base. The people that like Vicious Mosquito still love it. Some of them super enjoy Stomp, but some of them just don't gravitate to some of these new flavor profiles. But we're seeing a lot of these kind of, your more millennial generation drinkers definitely gravitating towards that kind of style as well. A little bit lower ABV, maybe not quite as bitter, but a big punch of still has that ruby grapefruit, but pink lemonade and tropical fruit and this kind of fruit cocktail salad. And then like XPAs and stuff that are starting to make their way through more and more. Even lower ABV, but still getting that big hop saturation, but balancing out that ABV with those IBUs. But, when we put it through sensory and panel, I think we're still maybe a little bit on the higher BUs than maybe some of these other individuals making some of these West Coast IPAs. Internally, we still feel that it helps balance the beer out and maybe doesn't finish a little bit, too quick on the palate, helps scrub off that ethanol sweetness. But it all kind of depends on, how dry we make the beer and what that balance is like. But yeah, definitely we're seeing that slight kind of trend into maybe slightly less slightly lower ABV, slightly less BUs. But we still want to not, alienate kind of some of our core customers that still actually enjoy that style. But definitely seeing the trends change.
Sure. Sam, for you guys, if I were to look back at like 2017 or so, I would make the assumption that the large amount of your new products were going to be 6.5 to 8.5% ABV IPAs or double IPAs. And that's what most of the kind of core customers would want from you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but also how has that shifted from then to now, 10 years later? Do you see drinkers even amongst your core market who are drifting into different zones for the beers you make, but that still want that flavor that you provide?
Yeah, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, 6%. Pretty much just could have made 8% plus beers all the time, which is what we did.
I was just trying to cover off and protect myself, just in case. I just didn't want to assume. I was already assuming. I just didn't want to assume too much.
I just think you were trying to make us not look like heathens. Yeah. So I do. I mean, I think for the most part, we've seen a little bit of a shift downward, but I also think that has to do with, we sell to more people than we used to. We had a much more core following that came just to the brewery to get it, and they were looking for that, and specifically. And I also think that even that group is like, oh yeah, I can't drink an 8% beer every day. So there's the new customers, and probably the evolution of the original customers have brought that number down a bit, but double IPA is still very popular. Like it hasn't gone anywhere. It's just, yeah, we make more of other styles now.
Make the
probably
same
make as much. Yeah.
Same volume of double IPA, but all the additional volume is coming in other beers on top of that.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, I think it's, we want to be able to provide diversity of offerings. The hops read differently, we get the same hop read totally differently in a lower ABV beer than a higher ABV beer. And yeah, it's just nice to be able to offer more, a bigger, broader experience for people.
You just said that those hops read differently in different scales of beer. Is there a hop in particular that you find as an example of that, where it comes across that you use it in a very different way in a lower ABV beer than in a higher ABV beer?
Yeah, I mean, I usually feel, just if you were just to start with the hop that everybody really, really uses a lot of, Citra, I definitely feel like that reads different. I usually find I get more orange out of some of the smaller beers that we do with it. By smaller, I mean like 6%, which isn't really small. And then I think we tend to see more dank characteristics come out on the bigger beers, and then that is also a scale of how much you're using that beer. It just gets danker and danker. Whereas some varieties, I don't feel like that's necessarily the case. It can kind of stay the same throughout, even if you're increasing the volume of hop that you're using in a particular beer.
Citra has an exponential dank factor to it, where it just it's not linear. Huh?
It feels like that. I mean, obviously, I don't have a way to prove that other than just taste, but that's what it feels like.
That's fair. Brendan, for you all, how much, you all again are making, around 100,000 barrels a year, in a significant distribution market. When you think about, bringing a new hoppy beer to market, there's a lot of work that goes into that to make sure that this is going to that there is actually a market for it, and that and so where have you all seen the market dynamic shifting in terms of ABV and hops?
Yeah, we're taking our information from our tap rooms. So we have two pilot breweries down in Denver, and we are constantly making mostly IPAs. Sam mentioned it earlier. IPA is still king. People drink a lot of lager, a lot of light lager. They're very interested in new one-off beers and things like that throughout other beer styles. But the majority of what folks are drinking in our tap rooms is IPA. Some places are more hazy New England style. Some are more clear West Coasty style preferences. But we're taking that aggregate information, and most of it is, and we're not asking anyone to fill out forms. It's just kind of organic data. But like Patrick mentioned, we're seeing folks enjoying a little bit less on the ABV side and a little less on the IBU side when it comes to hoppy beers. We're seeing people enjoying lagers that are heavily hopped. I mean, that's so we're playing around with different yeast strains and different levels of clarity and trying some new varieties as always. But we're seeing similar trends to a little bit lower ABV and a little bit more on the fruity preference over the resin dank preference. But we'll take that information, then take a swing, put it in a package, see how it does. A lot of times the new brands really don't take off the way they used to in this industry. I think we're seeing more folks gravitate towards fewer brands. There's less shelf space available for craft, and they're going to brands they know and trust. So we don't get quite the experimentation that we used to get from the consumer base. So it's hard to really gauge whether something's going to be a home run or not. But the last beer we just released like this week is a 5.8% IPA with some experimental hops and some concentrated hop products that we've never put in a packaged beer before. So we took that information from our taproom feedback. There you go.
Are you talking about this one?
That's the one.
This one
That's
I'm drinking right now? Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah, which is very different from Odell IPA,
In full disclosure, Brendan did swing by the office a couple of days ago and dropped off 2 6-packs for me. So, I figured it would be on brand to drink this one today. Patrick, I'm curious, you all have a series of pubs, but then also do a large amount of distribution business. Is there a difference or maybe a stylistic kind of gap between what people drink most of in the pubs versus what they buy in a kind of distribution environment and take home to drink?
Yeah, I mean, with the as many locations we have, each location has its own identity. We definitely see, down at our OG flagship pub in Sunriver, there's just a ton of tourism. So we'll see a spike in different, people want to come drink our core product from the source. So we'll see a massive uptick in vicious mosquito sales during that peak tourist season. And then kind of in the shoulder season, all of our limited IPAs, kind of king of the ring, those are still up there, but it's each one's just kind of uniquely different and definitely with the seasonal tourists that Central Oregon and Bend and Sunriver get, we'll see kind of these swings where it goes from, definitely our more local Central Oregon residents, lean into these new one-off IPAs that we have, and they're gonna have fish mosquito in cans at their home because they can get it from the grocery store. But these smaller batch ones that maybe we only have a limited amount of 16-ounce cans of them, or it's draft only, we'll see that significant uptick. But definitely, it's just kind of depends on the clientele that's coming through. But we still see Vicious Mosquitoes is generally up at the top of the list. Maybe not number one in draft sales. We'll look at week to week, but usually up there as well. Still has a very local customer base that's all they drink. I'm sure just like just like the rest of you all as well. But yeah, we're continuing to evolve and look at what might be next out in the market and how to get it in there. But, just as they discussed, the shelf space is becoming more and more challenging to get some of these new products in. So getting it in front of, majority of our customer base is just more and more challenging, and relying on that pub face-to-face relations to hopefully help push a product that we really think is fantastic and potentially hopefully get picked up in placements at some point. But it's we're in a unique spot for sure with all the flux of people in and out of this beautiful Bend, Oregon area. So
Sure. Sam, you all have tap rooms that stretch from Washington, D.C. through Philly, New York City, and then out into Western New York. It's a relatively big kind of geographical swath of the Northeast. How much difference is there in what people drink between those? And, similar kind of thing. Do you see a difference between beers people buy to, either to tick with friends, or to, to check in on Untapped, or to, for that kind of sharing mode versus those beers that they'd come in? I should say, like, the newer tap rooms are very much focused on serving people beer in the tap room, unlike that very original Brooklyn tap room, which was a tiny little place to try to serve beer. You are definitely focused on serving people on, draft in these newer locations. Talk about that kind of how that breaks out into some of the, and drives some of the kind of, new beers that you roll out.
Yeah, I think it's a mix across locations. I do think people are largely coming to drink. Well, it depends. I think tourists are coming to drink the IPAs for sure. Locals are probably skewing more low ABV in general. And then I think people are mostly looking to take home package of higher ABV. Like, we can't sell it. It's really difficult to sell lager in package, but we can sell a ton of double IPA in package. But people will come in and drink the lager on draft. So I guess in general, though, across New York, it's pretty similar. Same with Philly. DC is a little bit of an outlier. It's not as huge of a beer city, so I think it's a little bit more of a mix there. But Philly through Western New York, IPA.
From a creative standpoint, how have downstream hop products worked their way into your overall process? And, as you think about this kind of rapidly evolving world of downstream products, extracts, terpenes, hyper concentrated, downstream hop products, from a creative standpoint, we create the industry creates these things in order to, they ultimately created with the idea of, we're going to save you money as a brewer. The reality is that most brewers are like, well, I can use the same amount and make it even more saturated, and so brewers tend to, not figure out how to save any money with these. They just figure out how to go even bigger or make something even more, full, big, and highly saturated. From a creative standpoint, how have you worked those into a process? And talk about that kind of balance, because every brewer that I talk to has found their own thresholds for how these things work, and I can't find a single brewer who would tell me that they've replaced the way that they use, say, T90 pellets, or whatnot. That building a kind of idea of truth in the hop flavor is also important. Patrick, how have these kind of downstream products worked into your process?
Yeah, you touched base on it. We're not looking to, it's always nice to maybe produce some more beer and save some money. But, as long as we can, I think, get the same yield and get some more saturation, that's always nice. And, these hop products have provided that to us. But T90 is still king of the ring. It balances the beers out. You get two terpene downstream product, cryo driven. It just doesn't have the balance that a beer needs. Maybe as things evolve, that might be a different story in 10 years. But as of now, I think the consumer base and definitely internally for us, we build the beer around T90 and then cryo and then potentially some of these downstream hop products as well. And that's just trying to get a little bit more saturation. Can we balance the beer out that we see that it would benefit from these products? And we've definitely started to integrate them more and more. I'd say a couple of our core products have some of these products in them to, I think, just like I said, boost that saturation. Can we get a little bit more yield out of it, which is fantastic? Can we make a better beer and make a little bit more of it? That's the end goal for everybody. But we're always, we don't get over our skis, and I think we rely on a lot of these bigger guys like we're sitting with today, kind of doing a lot of that legwork. We have a decent R&D kind of program and how we can kind of integrate, but it's really leaning on the people that we trust with giant skill sets and large teams. And we like to see people kind of prove it a little bit, and then we'll start kind of running with it versus trying to be, I think, first to market. Just how our production is kind of laid out. But I think for us, T90, King of the Ring, and more integrating some of these products. But some of them, we just maybe haven't enjoyed or hasn't maybe lend to the styles or how we produce them at Sunriver Brewing.
That's fair. Brendan, you guys have started using it, as you mentioned. You're using some downstream products in this modern IPA that I'm drinking right now. You have a finely tuned sense around this. One of the most finely tuned that I've seen in brewers. It is amazing to me, and your ability to pick things out of these beers, especially like character of hops, is incredible. And so with this fine tuned sensibility, making sure that these products mesh well with what you expect out of hops is incredibly important. How has your experimentation led you to think about how you use these downstream products?
Yeah, to back up, we've been really reluctant to integrate some of these things over the years. 20 years ago, we were hanging bags of whole leaf hops in our fermenters for dry hopping. We still have a hop back. We're one of the few breweries, I think, that still brews with whole leaf hops. And Patrick mentioned it, T90 is definitely the foundation. We have not incorporated any concentrated hop products in our core beers other than this new release. And it took a lot of tries on the pilot systems to figure out what our customers were digging, because it may not be my personal preference to use some of these products the way we're using in these pilot brews, but the customers were loving them. They're looking for that extra level of saturation or that different character, a little less polyphenol, perhaps. Like, there's definitely a newer customer that's digging the stuff that has more concentrated or downstream hop products. But even with our integration of some of those in the pub systems, we've taken a conservative approach where we're taking our lots, our hand-selected lots, and processing them. We did that. We did try, I would say, Strata Hyper Boost is one that was really well received when we incorporated that into a couple beers that were kind of staples in our pub systems. We dropped that in for where T90 used to be in a couple beers, and it was received quite favorably. So there's definitely a lot of benefit. They're new tools, in the box, and we're embracing them more than we used to, but not in our legacy brands. It's more the new stuff that we're offering.
Sam, for you all, where saturation and intensity is definitely one of the names of the game, how have these downstream products worked their way into your all's brewing process?
We could add a whole nother episode about this.
Perfect. Let's do it tomorrow.
I think, if you look at all the different options out there, if you look at cryo hop, which we use quite a bit of, yeah, you're stripping away some of the polyphenol material. I feel like certain varieties work better. I found some of the varieties derived from Neo-Mexicanus hops to perform better as cryo. One of the features of a lot of those hops that are more difficult are the woody characteristics that come through. I found cryo hops tend to strip some of that out. Removing plant material seems to help clean that up. And then when we move into more flowables, like the Hyper Boosts, the Incognitos of the world, I think realistically, as a packaging brewer, you have to look at the advantages you're gaining in potential volume. Once you sell beer, selling beer into distros, not the greatest profit margins. So I think we all struggle with trying to, one, keep presenting a beer that's extremely hoppy, and also look for any advantages we can get. We don't do a ton of it into market at this point. We do have beers that feature it, but I think our main drive with that is to still make the beer better. If we're not making the beer better, it's not going to go into the beer. So we're looking at it from the perspective of, are we getting gains from it from a volume standpoint? The one for me that's a big one is, are we getting more shelf stability? Which I feel like we're seeing a lot of that with beers that we use it. We do our own internal sensory. We're holding on to beers. Sometimes we'll try something 6 months later just to see how it's holding up. A lot of the beers with flowables perform better. Again, they're only a portion of that is flowable products. The vast majority of it is still T90, because you just need that. You need those polyphenols in there to carry the beer. And then, yes, just the saturation. Are we getting more out of it? And for us, we've been looking at trying to create flowables from our existing selected lots, so that we're not just relying on the sensory of the hop companies. Not that they don't do a good job, they do, but they're making something for everybody, and we're trying to find the hops that we want in that case. So we've been trying to do all of those things at once and get to a point where we feel like we have the product we want to go into a beer full time.
Sure. Jim, before we pivot off of IPA, are there any topics here that I want to miss? I do want to talk about lager hops before we wrap it up. Anything that I've missed here?
Well, I don't think you necessarily missed anything. One thing I'm curious about, though, is to go back to the kind of the lowering ABV a little bit, and the fruit flavors from hops coming in a little bit more. I bumped into Sam at the Hop City Leeds event at Northern Monk last year, and so he knows this, but many of you were probably out there as well. But in the UK, it just was amazing to me how many expressive, hoppy, flavorful beers there were, even down under 4%. And I know that a lot of that's tax driven over there. We don't have that phenomenon in the United States, but I'm just curious from these brewers, if they see future potential in that area. Of course, it's wonderful. You can drink a hoppy beer all day long, and it doesn't affect you in a negative way from a behavioral standpoint. And so it is a really nice thing to have. But I know that these brewers are trying so many different beers to try to reach more consumers. But throw that question out, maybe to any of them. Yeah. Sam, since you were there.
This is a topic. If we could get people in the States to drink 3-4% beer, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But I just feel like this country is all or nothing. It's like 8% or NA. And I don't know why that is, but
yeah.
I love going to the UK and drinking. I like drinking just their cask ales in the pub, but it's also nice that so many of the craft brewers there do make, lower ABV hop forward beer that I wish that we can make. It's just, I don't know if anybody will ever buy it. you know?
Yeah.
So
We make a 3.8% IPA that we got in package, and I think it's just consumed by brewers. Not a top seller.
truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, same as well. Yeah, I mean, I think with the XBA kind of coming through and kind of yanking out, like session IPA, just it's. I think it's a fantastic style and all that, but you throw a session on that, and like I said, everybody's just like, "What? This is." It's like, this is a fantastic beer. It's like got still a ton of hop saturation, and it just the consumer base just doesn't quite get it. I think we're seeing a little bit of that kind of trend, but I think it's how us as brewers and mainly how as great marketing minds can kind of, I guess, get the right term in front of somebody that it intrigues them and doesn't seem like it's not a value and, oh, this is underwhelming. And it's like, oh, this is really punchy. And this is what I call, I love drinking my lawnmower IPA, it's like, have your sunny day IPA that's still got so much hop saturation, it's balanced, but you can mow the lawn and have a couple of them and not feel like, you're doing zigzags. But definitely challenging. But I think as marketing and all these platforms are, I think, helping us in a way to hopefully get some of that education to the consumer. And we've definitely seen that help to an extent, but not nearly as much as what we would hope for.
Yeah.
Have hop forward lagers filled any of that kind of zone for you? Whether we're talking about like dry hopped Italian style pills or West Coast pills, of those, because it is an interesting idea that people will accept a 4.5 to 5% beer if you call it Pilsner, and they won't accept a 4.5% IPA. And even though most of what we now are seeing as West Coast Pilsner are in some ways just smaller scale, like, session cold IPAs or session West Coast IPAs for that matter. They might as well be. I mean, those West Coast IPAs are made with 3470 yeast already, and you just make a smaller version of it, and there you have a West Coast Pils. Have you seen that fill any of that gap or find a connection with consumers that are looking for lower ABV beers, more drinkable beers, but also still trying to find that kind of hop character?
You asked him.
We don't mess. I'll just jump in. We don't mess with it. I mean, it's just another. I think on the East Coast, it's just a communication problem trying to explain what it is to people. I mean, on the East Coast. So, I mean, we just leaned into making some traditional styles throughout the year. We just made a hef, like making things that we wouldn't normally make that are lower ABV, try to get people interested, just see where people are at with it.
I think we might have screwed it up the first time we launched the session IPA, whenever that was, a decade ago. I don't think there were a lot of good ones out there. And I think we've come a long way as brewers, as an industry, to figure out how to create balance, something that does have mouthfeel, that is hop saturated and delicious. But I think that stigma holds a little bit. The session IPA is not as tasty as a hoppy Pilsner. So, I think we can climb out of that hole eventually. We probably do need some new terminology, like cold IPA to West Coast Pils or whatever it may be. But I think that people want to drink that beer. There's just not a lot of them. It'd be interesting to see how it evolves over the next 10 years.
I mean, we've definitely, throughout the last couple of years, really kind of dabbled in West Coast Pils, Italian Pils, and currently we usually always have about one hoppy lager West Coast Pils on tap, and we have seen that kind of good consumer feedback of it just comes across. It's just like it's elegant. It's like it's a Pilsner, and still with a good hop saturation as well, and the lower ABV and. Like our big, core clientele that loves our big over the top West Coast IPAs, they drink that and like, oh, this is fantastic. Like, it's like, oh, I could have a couple of these and I'm like, oh, this is a great, for us and float the river, cold IPA, West Coast Pils, kind of beer as well. So we've definitely seen in our market those styles do well. Out in in stores, we tried a West Coast Pils, a hoppy lager. Didn't do very well. I think it was kind of towards the beginning, middle, and I think still the majority of our consumer base in our area doesn't quite get it for what it was, and I think it was a marketing piece. Just like session IPA, I think give it some time and maybe bring it back out. And there's a little bit more better consumer education and awareness, but definitely at the pub level that we can kind of educate that consumer of what these styles are, and we can just get it in their hands. And once we can get it in their hands, we've seen some pretty good feedback on those different hoppy forward lagers.
Sure. Well, we've got a couple of questions here out in the chat that I want to address, and I actually think this first one's for you, Jim. What are some of the best ways for a smaller brewery to support production of their favorite hops? Mentions Comet is almost out of production and the Centennial is losing acreage. Are there things that brewers can do to ensure that some of these hops exist in the future and that they are there for them to brew with?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough as a small brewery, but every small brewery adds up. And if you get 500 small breweries, and there are 9,000 breweries in the U.S. now, supporting a hop, even in a small way, it's enough demand to add up, and it definitely helps. It's getting tougher and tougher in the hop supply world because it's getting tougher in the brewery world to really know what's going to happen next year. And that said, to whatever extent you can communicate your desire and your expectation to be using some of that hop during the next 12 months, that helps a ton, because that message all gets consolidated, and will give a hop a better chance of living on.
There's another question out here about hop varieties, and I want to focus this in. Are there any Oregon hop varieties that any of you are really excited about right now, whether they are existing or up and coming hops or experimental hops that from that kind of Oregon growing region that you're getting stoked on, or you have been stoked on? Brendan, we'll start with you.
I'll start with a public variety that we still use quite a bit. Chinook. Oregon Chinook is very different and very special, in my opinion. That's something that I don't know how many folks, looks like Sam's into it too. I don't know exactly. I might get in trouble here, but
No, you're supposed to crow about it.
Yeah, right. That's a spectacular variety. And then the Audacia is one that we're really digging these days. We're putting it into some of these lower ABV beers as a really nice layer. It's got some complexity to it that the customer's enjoying as well. So those are my two.
Sam, you're a Chinook fan also?
Yeah,
Oregon
I love Oregon Chinook. That's the best. I mean, yeah, we buy probably 60 to 70% of our domestic hops are Oregon, but some varieties really stand out and as different, and Chinook is one of those. So really, really like that one.
How do you use it in hazy IPAs? Are you just thinking about it as a kind of an amplifier for some of the other hops, or are you using it to drive entire beers?
Yeah, we don't use it for a single hop beer. Usually it's usually blended in, just because the styles we make are really pretty fruit forward. And I would say that Chinook in Oregon is like fruit forward adjacent. It's not like fully the fruitiest hop you're going to find, but just has enough of that Chinook backbone to it. It just adds a nice layer to the beers that I think is sometimes missing when you just get too fruity, ethereal. Yeah, but I'm a big proponent of Oregon hops in general. So,
well, Team Oregon Chinook is there in the comments, and they are with you on this one too. Patrick, favorite Oregon hops, both existing or up and coming?
Yeah, I mean, I'll piggyback. We definitely select a decent amount of Oregon-grown Chinook for those exact reasons. Huge fan for multiple different reasons. It's just got a great building block for so many other, I guess, kids in the pool to play with, as I would say. And definitely love like firm dry hop with the Oregon-grown Chinook. Definitely Oregon-grown Comet. We're definitely a handful of our core products are essentially Oregon-grown terroir-specific hops that we kind of built the beers around, a decade ago, and still stick true to that. Yeah, definitely, toot on Jim would be the Lorien. We've loved that hop. It's in our Italian pills as a heavy hitter in that. Just adds, has enough of that noble characteristic, but adding some fun kind of flavor attributes to that beer to kind of make it, as we say, our Italian, neo-Italian, U.S., Italian-inspired Pilsner. Same thing with our American lager as well. You wouldn't think a beer like that, would be, a hop-driven specific thing, and that Lorien really just adds a nice, unique element to that beer. At a very, you're talking not even a quarter a pound per barrel or something like that. Just the nuanced difference in that beer that we've trialed out through R&D and sensory. But yeah, I mean, between Comet, Chinook, and Lorien for us for sure has a standout for something that's we've been really integrating in a lot of these more lower ABV sessionable lagers that we try to provide for a diverse lineup at our pubs.
Sure. Anyone else out there in the chat have some questions for everybody here? Got a minute or two. We can try to throw some additional questions in. Pop them up there in the chat if you can. And then in lieu of that, Jim, any kind of, thoughts on the current market for hops and what brewers should be thinking about in terms of how they relate to hops today and work directly with hop brokers and hop growers to secure the best quality ingredients for their beers?
Yeah, I mean, all the brewers know the importance of trying to give the hop suppliers an indication of what they're likely to use. But I think we all in the hop supply industry know how difficult that has become. So, I think, for us, we look at it and it's a tough market out there. I feel like, some brewers, maybe we've kind of been, as an industry, a little stuck for a number of years here for various reasons, market reasons. And I guess the one thing I would just say is there are just so many unique hop varieties out there that maybe don't fit the profile of what a brewer has come to decide as well. To be a hop useful in an IPA, it has to look like this. It has to be, a big alpha, big oil hop. Where we see some IPAs brewed with hops like Crystal, the little 3% alpha, Hallertau analog out of the USDA that just brings some wonderful flavors to IPAs. Or Sterling is maybe even more surprising to some people. We've seen a combination like that Oregon Chinook and Sterling come together in very expressive IPAs in a wonderful way. It's just, I guess, when we're just trying to reach more palates, that's just one thing that I would bring up from a hop supplier standpoint.
Well, I think that is a great place to wrap this up. We've gone on a little longer than we planned. Oh, you got one more thing, Sam?
I have to know the answer to this question. It's that Scott Dorsch asked about whether or not Jim Solberg played football. I can't just leave that hanging. I got to know.
Jim, did you play Pac-10 football?
I did. I was down at Stanford. I grew up in a football family. My dad's a football coach. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we couldn't let that. I couldn't let that go. That had to be
Yeah,
answered.
couldn't let that go. It's been all football and beer for me.
And that Scott is someone that Brendan and I definitely know, and I imagine others of you do too. But a great little comment there. Anyway, what a great place to wrap this up. Patrick, Sam, Brendan, thank you all for joining the conversation. Jim, thanks to you and
Yep.
Indie Hops for supporting this
You bet.
conversation.
Yeah, thank you all.
Making this happen. I also want to mention that we have some really awesome Indie Hops driven content with some excellent recipes for any of you all that want to kind of really dive into the way that these brewers design actual beers with some of these hops. So go to beerandbrewing.com, check out the stories. You can search for them. There's a landing page for them and recipes, and we've got a couple from Brendan. I know we've got one from Patrick. Do we have another half recipe?
I don't think there's another half recipe, but they can taste some of these beers at our booth at CBC if they're heading out to Philly as well. Yeah, booth 926.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you all. It's been great talking about hops. Cheers.
All right, cheers.
Thank you all. Yep.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yep. It's been fun.